Hello, good afternoon, good morning, good evening. We are live here from VALUE4HER, AGRA's continental initiative around women in ag. We are so honored that you could join us this afternoon for this special segment of the TalkCorner session, where we will be hosting Dr. Jemimah Njuki. Dr. Jemimah is certainly not new to the people who are within the agriculture industry, has been a very, very strong champion for gender in agriculture throughout her career. And I'm going to just share her bio shortly. And we also have a group of women leaders on this talk corner who are going to engage Jemimah in a conversation that is going to help us understand the Food Systems Summit and what is in it for women in ag. So welcome all. My name is Sabdi Odido. I'm the head of gender and inclusiveness for AGRA. And I'm going to lead this conversation this afternoon. Again, I would like to share the apologies of my colleague, Agi Konde, who was supposed to be moderating this session, and she's not available this afternoon because of some emergency that came up. So welcome again, and thank you very much for joining us. So before I go on to introducing Dr. Jemimah and our other women business leaders who are also going to be part of this conversation, I would like to just share very briefly about VALUE4HER and of course the talk corners and what they are about. So VALUE4HER, and I suppose that a number of you have participated in our conversations in the past, is AGRA's continental platform around women in ag. It is an initiative that is looking at how to increase the participation of women in agriculture, how to increase benefits for women from agriculture, how to amplify the voice and agency and create agency for women in agriculture to be able to influence the institutional gender and social norms so that they are able to access and equitably benefit from the businesses of agriculture. We know that agriculture is a business. We know that agriculture is a venture. We do it for livelihood. We do it for income. We do it for sustainability. We do it for climatic resilience. So it's very, very important that that women are part of these different processes, and women are center of these different processes. TalkCorner is a special program around VALUE4HER. The main aim of the TalkCorner sessions is really to profile, sort of spotlight women that are making remarkable contributions to either agriculture production, agribusiness, but also the sector as a whole. And the idea is, of course, to give a platform to these women so that they can speak to other women, they can speak to the stakeholders within the continent, they can speak to the stakeholders across the globe. So today, TalkCorner is going to host Dr. Jemimah Njuki. Dr. Jemimah is, she's the Africa Director for IFPRI, and she's been in this space for the last 20 years and is a very, very familiar face in gender in agriculture. She's worked in Africa, she's worked in Asia. She has extensive resume. Of course, I don't think I'll be able to do enough justice to it within the short time that we have, but I just want to share a few of the places where she's been. She's been in IDRC, she's been in CARE USA, she's been in ILRI, she has served as a coordinator of Growth and Economic Opportunities Program. She's been a senior program specialist in agriculture and food security, of course, at the IDRC. She's been a gender and impact program leader and senior scientist at IFPRI. She has worked in many countries in Africa, Malawi, Zimbabwe, Tanzania, Kenya. And right now, today, we actually host her as the custodian of gender and women's economic empowerment of the Food Systems Summit. So Jemimah is actually the lead lever for gender and women's economic empowerment, women's empowerment generally. And so we host her today in that capacity. I would like to thank her so much for taking time out of her very, very busy schedule. We know that she's just come from the Food Systems Pre-Summit in Rome, and we just managed to catch her in time to tell us exactly what is in it for women in agriculture, how are we going to mobilize women across the continent around this agenda, how are we going to mobilize the stakeholders on the continent to coalesce around the agenda that is gender in agriculture. So this is Dr. Jemimah. So without taking more time, I am now going to invite Dr. Jemimah to share with us her insights. Firstly, her journey, and she has really been on this journey, and she's been a very strong champion for women's empowerment in agriculture. And she has done this not only through her research, but also her personal venture. She's always spoken about women empowerment in agriculture, and I have been a witness to this, and I know most of you have been witnesses to this. So we would like to hear her journey, her inspiration, and then from there, I'm sure she'll talk to us about the Food Systems Summit. So Dr. Jemimah, welcome, and please share with us your remarks.
Thank you so much, Sabdia, for having me. It's really a great honor for me to be on this platform. So thank you so much. As Sabdia said, I've been working on gender equality and the empowerment of women, especially those in the agriculture sector, for over 20 years, now. I think when you work on the empowerment of women and girls, it ceases to be just a job and it becomes a lifetime commitment. I think you'll all agree with me, those who work in this area, that it's not just a job. It is a commitment really to make sure that women and girls live in dignity. And so this has been a huge driving force for me, making sure we are working for the dignity of women and girls, that wherever they are across the globe, and especially those in Africa, because that's our continent, that they have control over the resources that they need to make their lives better, that they need to be empowered, that they need to make decisions, not just for their households, but for themselves as well, for what they want with their bodies, what they want with their lives. So there's a much bigger goal, even when we talk about women's empowerment in agriculture, because we want to see women thrive. We want to go on farms and find women smallholders thriving and not just struggling to make a living. We want to go to women's businesses and find them thriving and growing, and women actually enjoying and not facing any barriers. So that has been an overriding sort of principle for me. The second thing I want to mention is, and I have said this over and over again, especially for women in agriculture, we keep hearing we want to increase women's participation in agriculture or in agribusinesses. Women have always participated in agriculture. A lot of us went to school because our mothers farmed, because they went to the market, because they sold beans and they sold maize and they sold coffee. It is the reason, especially a lot of us who grown up in rural areas. It is the reason we can stand on podiums. So the goal here shouldn't just be to increase women's engagement in agriculture, because they've always been agriculture. It is their visibility that we haven't seen. So it is really to make sure we are increasing the visibility, the voices, and the leadership of women who are working in the agriculture sector, so that they can articulate what their priorities and their visions for themselves and their families are. So we really have to also change the language that we're using, because when we change the language, even what we do changes. When we talk about, when we move from talking about participation to visibility and to leadership and to voice, even what we do to elevate women in agriculture changes. So the third thing I want to mention is that in that same vein, we talk a lot about, let's train women, let's build their capacity for this and that and the other. But that's not enough, because what, even from a lot of my research, you start to realize is that women are working really hard. And I'm sure those of you here who have businesses, you will bear witness to this, that every day you're waking up to work at your businesses. But our systems, the systems in which women are operating, are creating barriers for them. Whether these systems are in terms of policies, whether it is political systems, whether it is our markets, whether it is our customs and cultures, some of these systems are creating barriers for women. And so I see the next generation of the work we do on women's empowerment really focusing on how we change systems, how we change financial institutions so that they work for women, so that they design products, so that they design services that actually work for women. Because guess what? If we say we are going to train one woman at a time, it's going to be a long time before we reach every single woman. But if we change, if you go to Equity Bank in Kenya now and change the way they do business, the way they design their products, that there's no reason a bank should be giving a loan to a woman to start a poultry business with day-old chicks, and expecting that repayment will start a month after the loan has been given. Yeah. Because then what happens? The chicks have not grown. They have not started laying eggs. So how do we actually get financial institutions to also understand the businesses that women are in? So this next generation of work, we really need to focus on working with these systems so that they work for women. Sabdio asked me to talk a little bit about myself and why I do what I do. When you grow up in a rural space as a young girl, you have this awareness, very distinct awareness of the inequalities that exist around you. And whether these are inequalities based on income, you see how your family lives versus how other families live in the village, or it is inequalities around gender. You see your mother working really hard, but not having the voice to make decisions about how that income is going to be used. Or you see inequalities between you and your brothers. I remember so clearly going to the farm, and we've had a whole day at the farm, or you've come from school, but when you get home at the end of the day as a girl, your day has just begun, because there's firewood to be collected, there is food to be cooked, there's utensils to be cleaned. But my brothers are busy playing, or they are revisiting their homework. So you start seeing these inequalities very early on. And so I had a very sharp consciousness of some of these inequalities. And I went to school and actually studied agriculture. So my first degree is actually in agriculture. I studied dairy, food science, and technology here in Kenya. And when I came out, believe me or not, I had decided I didn't want to do anything on agriculture. Like I didn't want, agriculture to me was poverty then. Agriculture to me was this thing that I didn't want to do. So I wanted to go as far from agriculture as I could. So for a whole year, I actually worked in the hotel industry. I was a management trainee in the hotel industry. And then one day my professor from the university came to the hotel and he looks at me and asks me, "What are you doing in the hotel industry? You were meant to go out there to the Ministry of Agriculture and change how things are done. How could you have got a first-class honors degree and then changed your career?" And so what he then did is he said, "I'm going to give you a job. You are coming back to the sector." And so for 2 years, I worked as a project officer at the Coast Development Authority, but part of the government of Kenya. And I started going around the field, especially in the arid and semi-arid areas. So we had the whole coastal belt and the northern and northeastern part of Kenya as our mandate area. And then the inequalities hit back at me, because you go there and women and girls are still struggling for the basics. Water, education, young girls getting married off because there's too much poverty. And those are things I had not known how to deal with because of having taken a technical agriculture degree. And so I decided to go back to school. And when I went back to school, then I did my PhD on rural development, specifically focused on gender and farming and farming systems. And from there on, and 20 years later, I'm still working in the sector. I'm still working on issues of gender equality and women's empowerment. I started as a very young scientist, working internationally, and I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about that. Came from my PhD at 29 and went direct into international organizations as a young researcher. So for years, I worked at the International Center for Research. It's called the World Agroforestry Center now, IFPRI, working on land management, working on land rights for women. Then I went to work for the International Center for Tropical Agriculture, running a 9-country program that was linking women smallholder farmers to markets and really building their capacity to understand how markets work, because we realized that was a huge gap. While women were trying to sell surplus in the markets, that understanding of what does the market really want? How do I price my products? How do I remain competitive in the market, but also how to add value and to grow what is valued in the market. You know, realizing a potato is not just a potato. There's a way that you grow the potato so that it enters the fast food market of Nando's and KFC. That it's not just enough to grow a pawpaw. There's a way that you grow that pawpaw. There's a size of the pawpaw that the market wants, and there's a way you can actually use science to grow that type of pawpaw. So that was very interesting work that took me to Malawi. I lived in Zimbabwe. I see Blessings is online. Lived in Zimbabwe for 2 years when most of the Zimbabweans had run away from the country during the economic crisis. I was there. But because I had also worked on livestock, I kept having this strong pull to come back and work on livestock. And because when you are out there and you're working with women, you realize the right to land and the right to property it's a long, windy curve to guarantee women's rights to those resources, and it's a work we have to do. That you've got to have the right policies that guarantee equal rights, both inheritance and other ownership patterns, but also work on the social and cultural norms that have to change to start seeing women as bona fide and rightful owners of resources such as land. But I knew that livestock was going to be such a strong entry point for women, because outside of property like housing and land, it was the second biggest asset that women would own and actually exercise their right to and sell. So I ended up working for years with the International Livestock Research Institute, really figuring out how do we use livestock as a means, as a pathway to women's ownership of resources and improving their bargaining power within households and communities. So that was within a very research context, but I kept thinking, you do research in one area and the impact is not great enough. So I looked around, and guess where I ended up? I ended up with CARE, the NGO, working with thousands, hundreds of thousands of women farmers across the continent and across Asia, increasing, seeing how we can improve their access to inputs, their access to markets, their empowerment. And that was a really exciting time of my life, because that's when I started seeing how we could actually have impact at scale. Because you're working with one network of women's organizations, for example, with 60,000 members. You are talking about financial inclusion. You're talking about bulk purchases of inputs. You're talking about bargaining in the market. So these really started opening my mind up to, we could actually make impact with this. But to have impact, you needed resources, right?
Yeah.
And so I made the next jump. And I went to IDRC and I said, this is where the money is. So if I could come from the ground and actually now influence where the money goes, we might actually get to this impact. So then I was in IDRC for 7 years. And that's where I also started expanding my work from just working on agriculture to work on other sectors and this was a realization that if you looked 2-3 years ago, if you looked at the sectors that were really growing, it was the construction industry, it was the manufacturing industry. Energy had started becoming a big thing. So the idea is, could we use the lessons we had learned in agriculture to actually get more women thriving in these sectors that were really growing? So that was an exciting time as well, working across these are the sectors. And now I'm at IFPRI, because underlying all that subdue is our government and our policies, and where governments put their resources and their money. So at the moment, I'm director for Africa at the International Food Policy Research Institute, working with governments using our evidence and tools to actually influence where governments put their resources. And the good thing about having a person with gender equality and women's empowerment expertise and commitment there is governments have a way of looking at things like growth. Is our GDP growing? Yeah, right? Are we reducing poverty? And so making sure that in that priority setting, that they are also thinking about, are we inclusive? Is this growth reaching everybody? Are women's lives improving from our interventions? So that's sort of the value add I'm bringing to this policy work, to make sure that governments are not just looking at whether GDP is going up, at whether poverty levels are going down, but they are also thinking about inclusion. They're thinking about nutrition. They're thinking about gender equality. They're thinking about all these intra-household issues that need to be dealt with. They're thinking about, if we invest in giving women rights to land, what then happens to all our other outcomes around nutrition, around food security, and working with the Africa Union to also see that they embed that as a principle of policy making and planning in the continent. In this journey, of course, I have learned a lot of things. I'm sure some of them will come up, but one of the things I have learned is we talk about women's empowerment as though that's something we can do, because women are already doing the job. It's really removing the barriers. If we can just remove the barriers that women face, I'm sure even the women entrepreneurs that are listening to me today, you know your businesses probably more than anybody else knows those businesses. And there's always skills, expertise, capacity that you can add to do it better. But the biggest thing we can do is make sure we are removing the policy barriers. We are removing the barriers of access to finance for women. We are removing the barriers that are stopping organizations from actually having women in leadership, the barriers that are stopping women from having voice and organizing and mobilizing. If we can remove those barriers, we have facilitated the empowerment process for them, because really as professionals, that's going to be our biggest job and our biggest role. And that's the message I've taken to the global stage at the UN Food Systems Summit, that as governments, as financial institutions, we are the ones that are failing women. Women haven't failed. They've been doing this. We are the ones that are failing women, and we need to take action and take action now, because this, as the world has come together for the UN Food Systems Summit, that it is such a huge opportunity right now. It's a moment. I call the UN Food Systems Summit a moment for women and girls, because if we do not rally our governments and that global system, including the private sector that's part of that system, if we do not rally them now to address those barriers, this moment might pass us. And I'm not sure when again the world will come together, all focused on food systems and what's happening in the food systems space, including agriculture. So that's what's energizing me around this representation of the leading the work on gender equality and women's empowerment for the UN Food Systems Summit. I'm gonna stop there, and we can talk about some of those specifics in the questions session.
Yeah. Very good. Thank you so much. And I now understand where your passion is coming from. And this is, of course, something that is so evident out there. I think you have really taken leadership for this agenda across the continent, but also now across the globe. And I really like what you said, that women haven't failed, we have failed women. And I think that is a very, very powerful message to take to such a global stage, where all partners, of course, after very many decades, are now sitting again to re-look at how we are structured our food systems and where the challenges are, where the barriers are. So I think this is very, very illuminating. Thank you so much. I know that we have a number of participants listening in. Please feel free to post your questions, your comments on chats. I have seen a couple of them already as Jemimah was speaking. I know there's a young lady who is actually asking. She says, look, I'm 28 and I would like to begin this career. I'm sure she's found her answer, because Jemimah managed to get her PhD at 29. And she's been able to walk this journey, this remarkable journey, and she's influenced and she's touched very many young professionals. So I hope that she's spoken to you as well. I'm seeing a couple of other comments on the chat, which I'm going to sample towards the end. So for now, Jemmy, just a few questions. And before I come to our women business leaders who actually have very specific questions for you, they would like, of course, to know what and how they can count on this initiative, the Food Systems Summit that is going on. And you have very clearly laid it out. You said women have done it. They've done their best under the circumstance. But how do we make sure that the rest of the institutions open up the space for them to advance even further? So one of the questions that I have here is to help for you to help us understand your role, of course, within the Food Systems Summit. You're the gender leader for the UN Food Systems Summit. And you, of course, are a champion for gender, but we would like to also hear from you how that works when we come back home. You know that our issues, our challenges are different. Across the board, of course, women face similar challenges, but when you come to Africa, when you come closer home, as you also said at the beginning, our issues are slightly different. Our cultures are very rigid. Our governments are not as responsive to this agenda. We know that they are challenges. That is why, for example, in Africa, if you look at women in leadership across the board, is far less than other continents. We know that the level of investment in building the capacity for women in leveling the field, for example, even in businesses, in investments, this is far less when you look at it vis-a-vis other sectors or even other gender. So what do you think needs to happen, especially on the African government's responsiveness to this agenda? How can we use this forum, this moment, as you had actually indicated? And indeed, it's such an important moment. How can we use this moment to get our governments, to get our policies, to get the investments right, to get the agenda up there? Maybe you could speak a bit to that before I open up to the other questions as well.
Thank you very much, Subdia. So first, very briefly on what my role has been for this process. So I was appointed by the Special Envoy, Dr. Agnes Kalibata, about 10, 11 months ago. And when I got into the role, first I was very clear that what goes into the summit cannot be Jemimah's voice, right? It has to be the voices of women from around the world. So, so I know I had a formal mandate. Oh, my so I had a formal mandate first of making sure that gender equality and women's empowerment and solutions to gender inequality were on the table as part of the agenda for the summit. The second mandate I had was there was a whole group of people working on the issues of the food systems and the solutions that would be taken forward post-summit. So my second mandate was to make sure that whatever was being proposed by others, and you'll have heard of how the Food Systems Summit is organized into 5 action tracks: one on access to food, on consumption, on production, on livelihoods, and another one on resilience. That everything coming out of these 5 groups, that it had considered what the impact on women and girls was going to be. So that was the second mandate. So immediately I then put together a team that worked with all these groups to make sure that gender, women's empowerment was being considered in their deliberations. But then I added another mandate. How do we get women's voices onto the table? How does what we present be part of women's voices and not just an expert group coming together and thinking this is what needs to be done. So I had dialogues across the world, literally. And I remember Agra were part of the conveners for the Africa dialogue. And we had one in South Asia, in Southeast Asia, in Central Europe, in Latin America, in the Caribbean, just to get women's voices on the table. And so when it was time for the pre-summit, I was very clear that what we were presenting to the pre-summit were not Jemimah's ideas or an expert group ideas of what needs to happen in the food system, but these were a representation of women's voices. And the good thing is some of the women then were also at the pre-summit, and hopefully they'll also be at the summit as well. So there's a couple of things that we called for. First of all, we wanted, there had been a lot of conversations about, we want a sustainable food system. We want a food system that feeds everybody, that respects the planetary boundaries. And the first thing we did was to also try to change that language, that food system also needed to be just and it needed to be equitable. So now when you hear a lot of the leaders talking, they'll also be talking about an equitable and just food system, not just a food system that respects the planet, which is important, but it also needs to be equitable. It needs to deliver for everybody. It needs to meaningfully engage everybody. So we were calling for this system that, where women's roles are visible, where their voices are being heard, where their leadership is amplified, where their roles, responsibilities, their opportunities and choices that are available to women are not predetermined by restrictive gender roles, that it doesn't say women can only remain in a certain, they can only own chickens. The moment they start owning bulls and buffaloes, it's a problem. But where all these barriers I'm talking about, whether they are cultural, whether they are social, whether they are policy, they cease to be barriers for women, where women are thriving, really, not this struggle of handholds and in access to resources, etc. So Subdio, basically what we called for were like 10 solutions, and I can talk about them a bit. It's closing the gender resource gap and increasing women's access to and rights to resources. It's a global mechanism of holding private sector accountable for leadership of women, for the policies that they come up, but also for equity in the outcomes that they produce. It was that one, an alliance of financial institutions that actually commit to making financial inclusion work for women, and work for women in food systems, that they are understanding the needs of women, they are designing for them, and they are delivering to them in ways that work for women who are in the food system. And we are hoping to actually have that alliance operational by the time we go to New York for the summit in September. But we also had an ask from governments around policies that, in the same way, you've seen a couple of countries have developed what are called feminist international policies, like Canada, Norway, Finland. And what we are calling for is a global commitment by governments, including our African governments, for gender responsive policies that are hinged on gender responsive budgeting, women's leadership, and are being held accountable to that. They have specific gender outcomes for their agriculture and food systems work, and those outcomes are being monitored and reported on, including at the Africa Union level. And then there was one commitment around decent jobs. Now, in terms of Africa, because we also have our specificities, one of the things we've done is the Africa Union convened ministers from around the continent to develop what is being called a common position for Africa on food systems. And as IFPRI and me as the custodian was part of that process to make sure actually that some of these, the empowerment of women, access to financial inclusion for women, that those became anchors of that common position for Africa. So if you read the African Common Position on Food Systems that was delivered by His Excellency President Kagame at the pre-summit, you will find, in fact, he started with increasing women's access to input and resources, because it is embedded right there in the African Common Position on food systems. And we made sure that that is part of the common position. We rallied a couple of ministers who are also committed to that. You'll have seen, for example, the Minister for Agriculture of South Africa even came to the gender session, because she's been one of our allies as the chair of the Agriculture and Resource Group of the Africa Union, to make sure some of these gender issues actually are part of the African position. Now, moving forward, each country is developing what are being called a national pathway to food systems transformation that is going to be drawn from this Africa common position. So the principles that we put in there, where gender equality, women's empowerment are embedded, we are expecting that that then flows into the national strategies for food systems transformation that each government is working on. So that's sort of the architecture of localizing from the global level down now to the country level in terms of governments and policies.
Amazing, amazing. There's so much that has already been laid out in terms of a foundation for us to really springboard this agenda, from what I'm hearing and the explanations that you have given of how this has been addressed through the food systems dialogue and the different follow-up mechanisms that are there. I think we have a great opportunity to now reflect on ourselves as a continent, on ourselves as countries, and to see how to take this agenda forward. Thank you so much, Jemimah. Now I am going to call upon a couple of women business leaders who are also on this call right now, and they have some specific questions for you. Remember, the conversation we are having is the food systems dialogue. What is in it for women in Africa? But what is in it for the women in ag generally? So I'm going to call upon Felicia Asira Opoku. Felicia is the finance director of Silver Slipper Ventures of Ghana. Felicia, I know you have a question for Jemimah, so please put your camera on, briefly introduce yourself, and ask your question.
Hello.
I can hear you, Felicia.
Hello.
Go on, go on. Felicia, can you hear me?
Okay.
Yeah, please go on. Go on with your question. Introduce yourself, go on with your question. And if camera is, if bandwidth is an issue, you can switch off your camera. We can hear you. Okay, I think that is a bit of a challenge. So I'm going to move forward now to Alphonsine Mutako. Alphonsine is the operations manager for Rwanda Grain and Cereals Corporation. Alphonsine, could you please put on your camera and introduce yourself first? Tell us a little bit about your business in just half a second and ask your question. Felicia, I'm going to defer you for now. Alphonsine?
Thank you so much. My name is Alphonsine. I'm working for Rwanda Grain and Cereal Corporation. I'm the operations manager. We are dealing with grain handling and marketing, and we are assisting farmers to get market, among them women and men equally. But here I have my question that I will be asking Madam Dr. Jemimah. Gender equality and the differences and embarrassment, imbalance between men and women is still existing despite all the efforts that have been done globally, whereby we see differences in land tenure systems all over the world. It's nice, according to what we heard about you, you've worked around the world almost in different settings. And the issue, it is still significant that distribution of land and education, basically these two things are significantly showing they are still poorly distributed among our fellow women. But if for many years, many policies, many approaches have been put on ground to assist eradicate this, and so far, different opinion readers, government readers knows this, but yet we don't see many changes. Whereby ownership globally, if you see Africa, Latin America, Asia, we're still below 30, and most of the parts we are still at 10, 8%. But we have seen also some countries like Rwanda, Philippines, doing things to help women and girls education and so on. So what is it in the UN summit? If all efforts have been done and still we can see no significant big changes, how do we get a hope? What are the possible approaches that goes down in the rural areas to reach our women who doesn't know how to read and write? And we want to put to them that they should go to banks, they should get loans, they should pay the interest, whereby even educated people are struggling with knowing how to do this. Now, what is there? What is actually on ground that we can see will improve the livelihood of these women? And for me, I'm sure that empowering these women is possible. I was born at 2 years, my dad died, but my mom, because she owned a land, she managed to take me to school, and I'm now a master's degree holder. I'm running an institution like this properly. And Rwanda, in that time, I was a refugee in a neighboring country, but still having an asset, being in the good environment that is favoring my mom, who did not know how to read and write by then. But today, she managed to do what I'm telling you. So we need a hope that can change something in this coming period, despite all the researches and knowledge that we have about challenges in different settings of the globe.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Alphonsine. And Jemimah, the question is, what is different this time? Where is the hope? Please respond to that. Thank you so much, Alphonsine.
I think this is where I see the biggest difference. The fact that for a long time, community organizations, leaders on the ground, women themselves are the ones who've been struggling to make things work, right? They are the ones who've been agitating for this change, demanding that their rights be respected. And what I can say is for the first time, even sitting with ministers, I'm hearing language of accountability. I'm hearing language of we need to do this. The issue of land, especially, because you heard me when I said that first proposition, it was about land. We have a few countries where policies have been put in place for equal rights and equal inheritance to land. But even when you have a policy, sometimes things don't work on the ground because that policy is not being, first, because the policy is not being translated to implementation, but second, because there is also norms that need to change at the local level, because people also need to start seeing this as normal, that it is normal for women to own land. They don't just have to own land when their husbands have died, but that it becomes a normal thing for women to own land, for women to own property. And this is where there is a lot of, where we also call on men, where we also call on traditional leaders to be part of the solution. So it was very clear that policy alone is not going to solve things. Perceptions have to change. I remember when the Constitution of Kenya was passed and it became women had equal rights and girls had equal rights to inheritance. I still remember so clearly my dad, my 5 sisters and my 2 brothers going to the land board in our county, and the chair of the land board consistently asking my father whether he was sure he wanted to give the girls this land. Several times. And she even asked even the married ones. Like it wasn't, the policy had not yet gone. This idea of women owning land had not percolated to the whole system, including the leaders on the ground. And what I say is we still have a lot of work to do about that. I saw in Tanzania the same with the Village Land Act, but the chief's view, if the chief's view about women owning land does not change, it doesn't matter what the Village Land Act says, right? So we still have a lot of work to get more men, more traditional leaders, the chiefs, those managing land boards, to really change their perceptions about this and to see the empowerment of women as desirable for us having a better world. That it's not, that this is not an agenda that's just about women. This is not women having power over men. This is about having power together so that we can change. So there is a messaging there and a mobilization that still needs needs to happen. What is making me also more optimistic is this message of women are not the problem, our systems are the problem is starting to sink in. For financial institutions, for example, to say women are such a huge part of our client base that it doesn't make sense as a business to be locking out people who are potential clients for our business. And we need, this alliance of financial institutions is actually aimed at that they start seeing, why are we putting barriers for clients? Isn't our goal to get women as clients? They are half the population. Shouldn't our goal be to get women to be our clients? So if that's our goal, what are these barriers that we are putting in front of them that we need to actually remove? So rather than women struggling with it, if paperwork is the barrier, if paperwork is the barrier, how do you deal with that paperwork? If the loan repayment is the barrier, how do you get more people in your team that understand women's businesses? How do you actually even get more women in your team that understand women's businesses? So that the way you design those loan products actually work for women. So this is why these are the thing we are calling the global 50-50 is very important. That you want to see women in the leadership positions of those organizations as well. And not to say every woman understands women's barriers, but it is a really critical step for changing some of those institutions. So that's why I'm a little bit more optimistic this time, that we are not putting the burden of addressing inequality. And this is very important. We cannot put the burden of addressing inequality on the people who are most affected by that inequality. It has to be the people in power that we put that burden on. And for me to see that shift, even though it is not a complete, to start seeing that shift of shifting the burden of addressing inequality to those with power, to those institutions that are creating those inequality. For me, that's a very positive, positive thing from this whole process.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you so much. You really put it so brilliantly. It is those that have the power to change these systems that are actually systems that create the barriers that keep women in these positions that we are actually trying to change. So I'm going to we're running out of time. So I'm going to move to Blessings. Blessing Machia, the founder at Shambakazi Investment from Zimbabwe, to come in with another question. Blessing? Blessing?
Thank you very much. Dr. Njuki, thank you for having us, for being here. Yes.
Blessing, your
Hello.
Yeah, it's not very clear. So maybe you put off your video. Could you shut your video?
Hear me?
Yeah, okay, go on.
Okay, it's better now.
Yes, yes, please.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Njuki. Yes. I just want to say,
the line is so
I
bad.
still can't hear
Blessing.
Blessings well.
People like you on
the line is so bad, Blessing. Hello?
Slowly, there's now more recognition in the
Blessing, I'm really sorry. The line is very bad.
And
Blessing, we cannot hear you.
Hello?
Hello, sorry, we cannot hear you. It's really a struggle.
Hello?
Hello?
You can't hear me.
It's slightly better now. Try again.
Slightly better. Try again.
All right.
Yeah.
My comment and question was, thank you, Dr. Njuki, and thanks to women like you on a global platform. Slowly, there is more recognition now in the important role that women play in agriculture and a huge drive in their involvement in various levels of agro-processing. But my question is, what next? What are the next processes at the United Nations Food System Summit that you think women agripreneurs can plug into for better results? And how do you think we can collectively achieve this? Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you very much. We managed to get to a question. Okay, Jemimah.
Thank you very much, Blessing, for that very important question in terms of what next. So at that global level, I can tell you two things that are coming next. One is that post the summit, what is coming together are what are being called coalitions of actions. And these are coalitions of actions where different governments are leading and coming together, but all the other actors are also engaging. So for example, there is a coalition on school meals to make sure that every country implements a school meals program to address children's nutrition. There is a coalition on zero hunger, making sure that we are getting to a point where there is zero hunger in countries, and whether that includes making sure there is social protection for those that cannot feed themselves, that governments have to commit to that. What we are currently pushing for and what we have on the table and are discussing with the Deputy Secretary General, the Special Envoy, Dr. Kalibata, and a couple of countries, is a coalition on making food systems work for women and girls, where we carry this agenda and make sure that governments are committing to it, and that they can be held accountable in the reviews that will be coming up after after the summit. One of the things I will say is, as Sabdio said, I just came from the pre-summit in Rome last week, and there was a very strong representation of women smallholders, especially the Pan-Africa Farmers Organization, represented by the President, Elizabeth Simandala, was there. She's in the advisory committee. We are closely looking at what is going to be passed to make sure that the issues of women are center to that. The next thing that is also going to happen is governments have to, as I said, have to have the national food systems transformation pathways. So each government has to have this. The Kenya one, for example, I know we had a meeting this morning at 10 a.m. The Kenya one is under development, and it is we have to figure out at the country level what is the engagement process, and as women actually engage, because even the Kenya one, although I'm very busy with the global process, I'm still joining the Kenya one to make sure issues of women entrepreneurs, women smallholder farmers, whether it's to do with financial inclusion, whether it's to do with land rights, that goes on the agenda, because then countries then have to report on how well they've done on these things. And if these things are not on the agenda, then it means they are also not reporting on them, and most likely they won't be doing a lot about them. So it's also engaging, and I know it takes a lot of time to engage, especially women who are in business. You are doing your business, having meetings like this is a luxury to a lot of people. If you are a farmer, you also cannot be taking all your time engaging in conversations, but it's really important that we continue engaging so that our issues are on the table.
Thank you very, very much. And it's unfortunate that we couldn't get the question from our other representative, but I know she's posted a question here and we will not be able to respond to it. Now we're actually coming to the end of this talk session. There are a couple of questions that have been posed by the other participants, and I know Jemimah has responded to a couple of them through the responses she made to the other questions. And yeah, most of it, of course, is hinging around, what is different now? You know, what should governments do? What should policymakers do? What should other institutions do? I think she has responded very, very well to that. So for the other questions that are here, we can actually make a written response to you. But for now, so in keeping within the time that have been slotted, I would like to take this chance to thank so much Dr. Jemimah for inspiring us with her life story, and also for sharing her expertise, but in fact her whole being really for this agenda. And it's remarkable. She's made a huge difference in this space, and now of course taking us to the food system space. She says there is hope because there are very many people now speaking to this agenda. It looks like we have managed to convince the people with power, the people who can change things. She says that women are not the problem. The problem is the structures, the institutions, the social norms, the businesses, the markets, you know, the way we've structured our society. This is the problem. Women have tried to make do within these systems, and these systems are the ones causing barriers. So she says we need to address the barriers one after the other, because women have already made a huge effort. Of course, they can build their capacity through training, through exposure, through mentorship, but a lot needs to happen from outside themselves, from within their environment. And she's talked about the initiatives that are ongoing, the national, the country national pathways, of course, the different coalitions that are coming up, and these all present opportunities for us to engage and to keep this agenda alive through this dialogue, of course, but also going forward. So Jemimah, thank you so much. I know you might want to say some, just in summary, some 3 key messages to the people that are listening to us. What would be your concluding remarks?
I think I'll say them based on some of the questions that I've been saying. You know, to the young people who are almost giving up on agriculture, I think it's one of the sectors that really provides a lot of opportunities, not just on the farm, but along the rest of the value chain, in research, like what what I'm doing now. But there really is a lot of opportunities in agriculture and in food systems. But we know the barriers are there, and we have to work on these barriers. The second thing is, I'll say the solutions are not going to be a magic bullet. Someone asked, what are some of the big barriers that we still face today? What I know is we've got to work at different things and from different entry points at the same time. You can make a policy, but if the society is still not changing its perceptions around women's leadership, the leadership of girls, accepting that women owning resources is good for the whole society, that policy doesn't meet the expectations and doesn't have impact. So we need to be working at multiple things at the same time, because I think it is the issue of, because of these long historical barriers, it is one of those areas where there's not just a magical bullet. But the other thing I want to say is that the struggle for the empowerment of women and girls shouldn't just be a struggle for women. We really want to engage men and boys and traditional leaders, because it is, I always say, patriarchy also hurts men. Some of these issues we are talking about also hurt men. They hurt our families, they hurt our communities, they hurt our countries. So it's gonna be something that we all have to do together, because the empowerment of women and girls is good for all of us. This is power to do together to make things better. And the last thing I'll say is, I see a lot of hope. I know I've always, having worked, as you can imagine, having worked on gender equality for 20 years, I think this is one of those and in the ag sector, this is one of those moments where I'm seeing so much conversation, so much mobilization, solutions on the table at global level, at country level, working in the dialogues with grassroots women. It's one of those moments where everybody's having the same conversation. And these moments don't happen very much in our lifetime. So I see a lot of hope that we can translate, and I've seen a couple of comments there, that we can translate all this energy and global conversations into real action in terms of changing our systems so that they work better for women and girls.
Wow, thank you. Yeah. Thank you so much, Dr. Jemimah, and also for responding to the questions through your closing remarks. Indeed, it is the moment for change. It is the moment for this conversation, and there is a lot of hope for us to transform the gender norms, the social barriers, the policy barriers, the market barriers, the barriers around finance. And that is why this conversation is very, very important. We will continue to have it going until everybody has heard us, until everybody is convinced that there is need for change, and until everybody is on board. Thank you so much, Dr. Jemimah, for coming on board. Thank you so much to our participants. Thank you so much to our women leaders, Alphonsine, Blessing, and of course our team for having put this together. This is really amazing. This TalkCorner was hosted under the VALUE4HER platform, and my colleague Marjorie has posted the link to the platform, the digital platform that brings women agri-entrepreneurs from across the continent together. Please join us in this platform, because in the end, as Dr. Jemimah said, the more we consolidate our voice, the more we consolidate our power, the more we can change these systems that are rigid, that are restrictive, that are putting women that are limiting women's progress. So I think we are going to stop there. Thank you so much, and look forward. Please look out for our next Talk Corner. We will be bringing out prominent women voices from across the continent, from across the globe, to speak to us, to inspire us to continue on this journey to change things also for women, but also for our society. Thank you so much, and look forward to engage more.